Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing some news that is not directly related to the San Jose Sharks, but that some Sharks fans, or honestly all Sharks fans, would likely be interested in hearing, and that is that centerman Joe Thornton has signed a one-year deal with the Florida Panthers for the 21-22 season. Now, we should talk about sort of how Thornton ended up departing from the San Jose Sharks at the end of the 1920 season compared to a player like Patrick Marleau, who actually stayed for the Sharks, or with the Sharks, for the 2021 season. Now, let's go back to that 1920 season. The Sharks were having a disastrous year, very far out of the playoffs, even in a year where 24 teams managed to make it into the little playoff bubble that the NHL did. The Sharks were still quite far away from that. So moving up to the trade deadline that year, it was pretty clear that the Sharks were not going to be competitive, and so players like Marleau and like Thornton would have loved to be traded to more competitive teams. Since they are, of course, at a later age in their career, they would like to go for a Stanley Cup. And with Patrick Marleau, that did indeed end up being the case. He was moved to the Pittsburgh Penguins for actually a pretty decent haul of draft picks, and so he was given an opportunity in the playoff bubble. And even though the Penguins were eliminated in the play-in round, that is still technically making it farther than what the Sharks did. For Thornton, however, for whatever reason, a deal never really materialized for him. As you take a look at the fact that no good deal like with Patrick Marleau ended up happening, but also the fact that Doug Wilson didn't even decide to get rid of Thornton for like sort of a friendly type of move, right? He could have technically been traded for future considerations. He could have been traded for a 7th round pick, but instead Thornton ended up remaining with the Sharks for the rest of that season. And rumors around that time circulated that Thornton was not particularly happy about that, and so it was somewhat no surprise that during the offseason of that year, he decided to sign with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, unfortunately, Thornton's goals were to try and win a Stanley Cup, and you can see how that can conflict with the fact that he signed with the Toronto Maple Leafs, but this offseason, he learned from his mistakes and decided to instead go with the Florida Panthers. The Florida Panthers have been on the up and up as of late, but this past season were beaten by their big brothers in the Tampa Bay Lightning. But the Lightning this past offseason have gotten noticeably weaker with the loss of their entire third line, that being Yanni Gourde, Barclay Goodrow, and Blake Coleman. And the Florida Panthers have gotten somewhat better, especially with the addition of a player like Sam Reinhart from the Buffalo Sabres. So Joe Thornton hitching himself to that bandwagon, betting on that horse, certainly not a bad idea. We'll see if the Panthers can get over that hump of the Tampa Bay Lightning, because if they can, the Eastern Conference is pretty wide open, and that could be a potential trip to a Stanley Cup Finals for just Thornton's second time in his career, and potentially for a first ever Stanley Cup Finals victory. What this signing does also bring up in terms of a question would be, what is actually the future of Patrick Marleau? Both those players were drafted in the same entry draft, the 1997 entry draft, so the fact that Thornton is still playing definitely makes you wonder whether or not Marleau is going to try and still play this next season, but I'll have more on that in a future video. Class dismissed.